So, amid the ruins of Gaza, Israel announces a new military campaign backed by troops and tanks against Hamas in the central part of the territory. Local medics say at least 70 Palestinians have been killed and more than 300 wounded. It comes as international mediators prepare for talks in Doha aimed at advancing a ceasefire and hostage deal. 5 days after the US president set out a new plan for a truce in Gaza, it's still not clear if the two sides accept it. The White House says it's still awaiting a response from Hamas, while Israel's government remains deeply divided over the issue. The plan is being discussed today by Egyptian, US and Qatari security officials in Doha. But while the talking goes on, so does the fighting, with the Israelis launching what's been described as a new apocalyptic operation in the center of Gaza. Correspondents say that nearly 8 months after the October the 7th massacre, Israel has still been unable to defeat Hamas. In another development, Slovenia has become the latest European country to formally recognize Palestine in a move the left-wing government hopes will increase diplomatic pressure for an end to the war in Gaza. The National Assembly vote follows similar decisions by Spain, Norway and Ireland and adds Slovenia to the nearly 150 countries which already recognize Palestine as an independent and sovereign state. The Conservative opposition, which boycotted the vote, has called for a referendum, saying recognition would support the terrorist organization Hamas.
I think it's very important. It's a historical decision of our country. And maybe many governments before could have done the same. But now the time is ticking and a lot of people are really suffering in Gaza.
We're hearing, whilst we're waiting for Carl to connect the dots, as it were, we're hearing of a massive Israeli attack in central Gaza. The people there, news that's trickling out, the medics are saying that at least 70 people, possibly more, most of them women and children, have been killed. They said bodies were being brought to the local hospital. They said at least 300 others had been wounded, which is clearly an indication that Israel is stepping up its operations and has no intentions of slowing down with its offensive in Gaza. We were going to talk to Carl about that and get an update from him. And of course, beyond Gaza itself, inside Israel, thousands of police have been deployed for the annual Jerusalem Day parade, which is where tens of thousands of Israeli nationalists march through the old city, waving Israeli flags to celebrate the capture of East Jerusalem in the 1967 war. I mean, it's usually a flashpoint because it takes them through Arab territory. And so we would obviously want to know what the situation is, whether things have passed off peacefully or whether there's been some kind of trouble there. And of course, we mentioned earlier that Slovenia has become the latest European country to recognize Palestine as a state. We saw similar moves from Spain, Norway and Ireland just a couple of weeks ago. All of those in response to the war in Gaza. It is, of course, a symbolic move because it's not going to make that much difference. But it appears to be rubbing the Israelis up the wrong way. I'm told we've got Carl Bostic. Let's go back, and if you can be fairly pithy in your analysis, that would save us a bit of time, Carl. What's the latest in the fighting in Gaza? We hear that the Israelis have launched a massive operation in central Gaza.
Right, Charles. Good evening. You know, until there's a ceasefire deal, this offensive, this campaign will continue because they're determined to eradicate Hamas militarily. That means, you know, going after those tunnels that go into Egypt. And that's the last place in the Gaza Strip. It's only a quarter the size of Abuja, Charles, where you are, and Rafah alone is an eighth of the size of Abuja, and that's where the heaviest fighting is concentrated, Charles. But I also have to tell you, Charles, we're talking about guerrilla warfare, urban warfare, a densely populated place where still hundreds of thousands of people are located, and also they're going after fighters who are in tunnels. So until there's a ceasefire deal, Charles, this will continue. But it looks like there's a lot of pressure internationally to bring this to at least a pause or ceasefire.
Well, I mean, you talk about pressure. We'll get to that in a minute. But I mean, the world is kind of watching all this and wondering how the Israeli army, which has been, I mean, rated as one of the most powerful in the world, has been unable to defeat Hamas after more than 7 months of fighting in Gaza.
Well, Charles, once again, you've answered your own question. That's why people are very frustrated. We actually are into the eighth month, and they're saying, why is it taking so long? In fact, people are second guessing the government. They're saying maybe we should have started with Rafah first, because that was the lifeline for Hamas, a network of tunnels that from Egypt that led into the Gaza Strip that allowed them to, smuggle or send weapons and rockets and fighters into Gaza for these past 16 years and to build tunnels. And that's where we are right now, Charles. After 16 years, you can't erase it overnight. So you're absolutely right, and that's why people are very divided. Meanwhile, you've got more than 100 hostages still being held. Many here in Israel, Charles, assume that most of them are no longer alive. So there's a lot of division here. People are very upset. And that, Charles, finally, this is not the only front that Israel is concerned about, because it's a front that's in the north on the Lebanese border. And of course, you also have the West Bank.
Right, where you're sort of breaking up a little bit, Carl. I'm not quite sure what to do about it. I think it's the line. But let's turn to Israel itself, where you are. The police say they've deployed more than 3,000 officers for the annual Jerusalem Day parade, which is when tens of thousands of Israeli nationalists marched through the old city waving Israeli flags to celebrate the capture of East Jerusalem in the 1967 war. I'm told we've lost Carl. I'm afraid we're going to have to lose him permanently, because we can't continue this way. I was going to ask him about he touched on it briefly, the peace proposal that the Americans, President Biden, had announced last Friday, what the situation is, because we understand there's quite a lot of people gathering in Doha to try and talk about how to resolve this crisis and to get the two sides to sign on to that latest peace deal. Carl, if you can hear me, I was going to ask you about that march in Jerusalem, the march in Israel where you are, thousands of Israeli nationalists marching through the old city, celebrating the capture of East Jerusalem in the 1967 war. I mean, has it been a peaceful march?
The short answer, Charles, is no. I mean, to put things in context, Charles, is this. This is Flag Day. What that means is this. This was like the day to mark the anniversary of the end of the Six-Day War in 1967, Charles, where Jerusalem was united, West and East Jerusalem, because Israel won the Six-Day War. So it's a time when Israelis and patriots can basically flaunt their nationalism and march through the Muslim parts of Jerusalem saying, we won this war back in 67, and we're the people who are in charge of Jerusalem. So they marched through the old quarter of Jerusalem, the old city. There were lots of chants of death to Arabs, and Arab journalists, were beaten to the ground and they were kicked. So it was a very, very ugly scene, but it's made worse because of the war going on right now, Charles.
Carl, thanks very much indeed. Thank you for your valiant efforts there, but I'm afraid the line simply isn't holding up. Carl Bostic is a RISE special correspondent. He was talking to me there on the line from Tel Aviv. We were going to speak to him about that decision by Slovenia to join the list of countries that have recognized Palestine. The message from the Slovenians is that they're sending a message for peace and a message to Palestinians that they have a right to self-determination. The Israelis, of course, are arguing that this is the wrong time to do that and that this comes across as rewarding Hamas for its activities. And of course, some are arguing that what the ordinary Palestinian needs right now is not recognition, but food, water, medicine, fuel, shelter, and for the war to end. But of course, many argue that those two approaches, on the one hand, recognizing Palestine, the symbolism of that, and on the other, pushing forward with aid, are two things that should be running concurrently. So that's the situation. Pity the line would not hold, but you heard me battling there to talk to our correspondent, special correspondent, Carl Bostic, who is in Tel Aviv.